My name is Claire, and I was 28 years old when I believed I'd found my soulmate. His name was Ethan. Our whirlwind romance swept me off my feet, and before I knew it, we were married within a year. Ethan worked as an accountant, practical, dependable, with a laugh that could light up any room. Meanwhile, I was a digital marketing specialist with a passion for painting. On weekends, you'd find me lost in my canvases, colors blending under the soft morning light. We seemed like the perfect balance. I was meticulous, a planner by nature, while Ethan thrived on spontaneity. He brought adventure into my structured world, and I thought I gave him the stability he craved. The day after our wedding, our living room was a beautiful mess. Gift bags, cards, and ribbons were scattered everywhere, a colorful reminder of the love and joy we'd shared with our friends and family. Ethan's parents, Helen and Martin, showed up that afternoon. We hadn't spent much time together before the wedding, due to how quickly everything happened, but they seemed pleasant enough when we met at family gatherings. Helen, a petite woman with sharp eyes, always carried herself with an air of authority, while Martin was more easygoing, the kind of man who could find humor in just about anything. As we opened the gifts, I couldn't help but notice Helen and Martin taking a particular interest in what we received. "Is that a crystal vase?" Helen asked, her eyes lighting up as she picked up a sparkling vase from my aunt. I nodded. "Yes, it's beautiful, isn't it?" Helen examined it closely, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns. I could see the wheels turning in her head, and I instinctively knew what was coming next. "We could find a nice spot for this at our house," she said, her tone casual, as though it was the most natural suggestion in the world. I was taken aback. "Actually, I was thinking it would look great in our foyer." Helen's expression shifted subtly, just enough for me to catch the flicker of disapproval. "Claire, you need to learn to share," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We're family now. Families help each other out." Ethan chuckled, clearly unaware of the tension building. "Mom, that's our wedding gift," he said, treating the situation as a joke. But Helen wasn't joking. The first year of marriage flew by faster than I expected. Ethan and I were settling into our new life together, building routines, blending habits, and learning each other's quirks in ways only marriage can reveal. Sure, there were moments where I bit my tongue when Ethan's parents pushed boundaries, but I chalked it up to adjusting to family dynamics. I thought things would even out over time. When our first wedding anniversary came around, I wanted it to be special. Ethan and I both loved this charming little restaurant called La Rosette. Intimate lighting, rustic decor, and the best damn seafood you could imagine. I made a reservation, excited to surprise Ethan. But then I had an idea. Maybe I should invite his parents. I figured it would be a thoughtful gesture, a way to show them that I valued them too. Maybe if we celebrated together, things would feel more like family. Big mistake. The moment we arrived at the restaurant, Helen and Martin were already seated at the table, browsing the menus with focused intensity. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, flashing me that sweet smile of his, the one that made me forget everything else for a moment. "This place is fancy," Helen said, eyes darting around at the decor. "We love it here," I said, hoping to steer the conversation toward something light. As we settled in, I glanced at the menu. I already knew what I wanted: the salmon. It was Ethan's favorite, and I knew he'd order it too. Then Helen spoke up. "We'll have the lobster and the filet mignon," she said to the waiter without hesitation. Martin, ever the jokester, added with a grin, "And bring your best bottle of wine. After all, it's a celebration, right?" I felt my smile tighten. I glanced at Ethan, hoping he'd catch the discomfort in my expression, but he just shrugged, completely unfazed. "It's a special night," he said. "Let's not worry about the cost." The meal went on, course after course, with Helen and Martin savoring every bite like royalty. They seemed completely oblivious to the tension sitting heavy between us. When the check came, my stomach clenched. The total was higher than I expected, way higher. Ethan raised his eyebrows in surprise, but quickly recovered, handing his card to the waiter without a word. As we left, Helen looped her arm through mine. Her voice was warm, full of contentment. "Claire, this was just lovely," she said. We should do this again next year. I smiled politely, but inside I was screaming. We got in the car, and the silence between Ethan and me was deafening. That was a bit much, don't you think? I finally said, keeping my tone as light as possible. Ethan glanced at me, confused. What do you mean? The lobster, the wine. They didn't even look at the prices, I said, trying to keep my frustration from bubbling over. Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Come on, Claire. It's one night. They're my parents. I bit my lip to stop myself from saying what I really wanted to say. And I'm your wife. But I let it go. For now. By the time the holiday season rolled around, I was ready for some peace. I'd hoped the tension from our anniversary dinner would fade, and for a while, it did. Ethan and I settled back into our rhythm, weekend brunches, lazy mornings, little moments of joy that made marriage feel exactly how I imagined it would. One night, we were decorating the house, stringing lights around the living room windows. Ethan was untangling a stubborn strand when his phone pinged. He glanced at the screen and chuckled. Oh, my parents are ahead of the game, he said, scrolling through his messages. They've already sent their Christmas wish list. I paused, holding a glittery ornament in my hand. Wait, wish list? Yeah, they send one every year. Makes shopping easier, Ethan explained, handing me his phone. I took it, curious. But as I scrolled through the list, my curiosity turned into disbelief. Designer handbags, high-end electronics, luxury skincare sets. Every item was extravagant, like something from a celebrity gift guide. They can't be serious, I said, shaking my head. Ethan shrugged. They like the good stuff. What can I say? I handed the phone back, feeling a knot tightening in my stomach. It wasn't just that the list was over the top. It was the assumption behind it, the expectation that we'd deliver. No questions asked. For Ethan's birthday, I'd been saving up to buy him a watch he'd been eyeing for months. I loved seeing his face light up when he talked about it, and I couldn't wait to surprise him. But now, that excitement was overshadowed by the looming reality of his parents' wish list. I half-jokingly suggested, maybe we should just ask for charitable donations in our name instead. Ethan laughed. Good one. But seriously, you need a new laptop, right? I nodded, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. Something felt off, but I couldn't put it into words just yet. When it came time to buy gifts for Helen and Martin, I decided to keep things practical. We picked out a nice coffee maker for them, high quality, but not excessive. Christmas morning, we gathered around the tree with steaming mugs of cocoa. Helen and Martin were in their usual chatty spirits, complimenting the decor and reminiscing about past holidays. For a moment, it felt normal. Then came the gift exchange. Helen opened the coffee maker with a polite smile. Oh, how thoughtful, she said, her tone neutral. We've been meaning to upgrade. Meanwhile, Ethan tore into his gift, a sophisticated drone that Helen had chosen for him. His eyes lit up with genuine excitement as he examined the gadget, and I couldn't help but smile, happy to see him happy. But as I unwrapped my gift, my smile faltered. A set of scented candles. The candles were lovely, sure, but the contrast was glaring. While Ethan received a high-end drone, I got candles. It was like there was an unspoken rule: give generously, receive modestly. I glanced at Ethan, hoping he'd notice the disparity, but he was too busy fiddling with his drone to pick up on my discomfort. Later that evening, as I sat by the fire sipping my cocoa, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe it wasn't a big deal. But deep down, I knew it was more than just the candles. It was the growing pattern, the sense that Helen and Martin's needs and wants always took priority. And Ethan, whether out of loyalty or guilt, never seemed to question it. As the holidays wound down, my quarterly bonus came through. It was more generous than I'd expected, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of excitement. That night, over dinner, I told Ethan my idea. Guess what? I said, grinning. I got my bonus today. That's awesome. He leaned in. genuinely happy for me. I was thinking, what if we finally did it? Our dream trip to Venice, just the two of us. We've been talking about it forever. Ethan's eyes widened with excitement. Venice? Really? He stood up, coming around the table to pull me into a hug. That's amazing, Claire. His reaction was everything I'd hoped for. We laughed, we kissed, and for a moment everything felt perfect. Then his phone rang. He pulled it out of his pocket, glanced at the screen, and smiled. It's my mom. One sec. I sighed, taking a sip of my wine as he answered. Hey, Mom, guess what? Claire and I are going to Venice. I froze. Why did he have to tell them right away? I listened as his excitement faded into something more subdued. I know. You've always wanted to go, he said, his voice softening. A pit formed in my stomach. When he hung up, he turned back to me, his expression somber. They want to come with us. I set my fork down, my appetite gone. To Venice? With us? He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. They said they've never been and always dreamed of going. I stared at him, trying to keep my voice steady. Ethan, this trip is supposed to be our time, something special for us. I know, he said quietly. But they're getting older. They won't have many chances to go. The room suddenly felt claustrophobic. It's supposed to be our trip, I repeated, my frustration bubbling up. Keith, we've been planning this for years. They can go another time. He sighed, his frustration mirroring mine. You know how they are. They won't understand if we say no. And what about me? I asked, my voice trembling. Do you understand how much this means to me? Or am I supposed to keep sacrificing for them? Ethan looked at me, his conflict written all over his face. I don't know how to make everyone happy. I swallowed hard. We can't always make everyone happy, but you promised to put us first, Ethan. You made that promise when we got married. He nodded slowly. You're right. Let's tell them it's not the right time. Relief washed over me. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally starting to understand. But a week later, when Ethan picked up the phone to tell his parents, his resolve crumbled. Maybe next year, he suggested. We can all go together then. Helen's voice came through the speaker loud and clear. Why wait? We can afford it now. And just like that, the trip I'd dreamed of for years was slipping away. After the call with Helen, the air between Ethan and me grew heavy. I could feel it settling over us like a storm cloud, thick with everything we weren't saying. I cleared my throat. So, what's the plan now? Ethan avoided my gaze, fidgeting with his phone. I told them maybe next year. That's not what they want, though, I said quietly. No. He sighed, rubbing his temples. They want to go now. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. And what do you want, Ethan? Because it feels like every time your parents ask for something, you forget what we want. He finally looked at me, and I saw the conflict in his eyes, the same torn expression I'd seen too many times. I feel guilty, Claire. They've done a lot for me. And what about us? I asked, my voice soft but steady. What about what we've done for each other? Our plans? Our dreams? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling like the answers might be written up there. I don't know how to make everyone happy. I leaned forward, catching his eye. You can't. That's the point. But you married me, Ethan. It's supposed to be us against the world, not me against you and your parents. He winced at that, running a hand through his hair. I know you're right. It's hard. It's hard for me too, I whispered. But I'm not asking for anything crazy. I'm asking for time with you, just us. Is that too much? For a moment, it felt like he really saw me, like he understood. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. You're right. We'll figure it out. But figuring it out didn't happen. A few days later, I woke up to an unsettling quiet. The other side of the bed was untouched, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. My stomach dropped as I saw the flood of notifications, bank alerts, flight confirmations, hotel bookings, all under my account. My heart pounded as I opened the emails. 2 round-trip tickets to Venice, 5-star accommodations, all booked using the bonus I'd been so excited about. And the flight. It had already departed. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Ethan had access to my accounts, sure. But why would he do this? Why would he take them on the trip that was supposed to be ours? Before I even realized it, I was dialing his number. It rang and rang before going to voicemail. His voice, cheerful and familiar, felt like a punch to the gut. "Hey, it's Ethan. Leave a message, and I'll get back to you." The beep sounded, and suddenly, I found my voice. "Ethan, I saw the charges. You took your parents to Venice using my bonus." My voice shook, but I pushed through. "I don't even know what to say. I hope it's worth it. I really do." I hung up, my hands trembling. The house around me felt colder, emptier, like it wasn't even mine anymore. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, as the weight of his betrayal settled over me. I thought I knew him. I thought we were building a life together. But now? Now I wasn't so sure. I didn't sit in that silence for long. With shaky hands, I logged into my bank account and started canceling everything tied to the trip. The hotel, the return flights, gone. Each cancellation felt like ripping off a Band-Aid, painful but necessary. Then, I took the next step. I contacted the bank to remove Ethan's access to my accounts. Every click, every confirmation, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. By the time I was done, I felt a little lighter. Not good, not yet, but stronger. Determined. The man I married had made his choice. And now, I had to make mine. That afternoon, I packed a bag. Essentials, clothes, a few sentimental items. The wedding ring. I left it on the counter, its sparkle mocking me in the afternoon light. As I locked the door behind me, I felt like I was closing more than just a house. I was closing the door on a version of myself. The version that bent over backward to keep everyone else happy. The version that stayed quiet to keep the peace. No more. I drove to my sister Olivia's house, tears blurring my vision. She opened the door before I even knocked, pulling me into a tight hug. "Claire, I've been so worried," she said, her voice thick with concern. I broke down, sobbing into her shoulder. I don't know who he is anymore." She guided me inside, settling me at the kitchen table. "Start from the beginning." As I told her everything, from the anniversary dinner to the Venice trip, her expression shifted from shock to anger. "You deserve so much better than this," Olivia said firmly. "You've done everything for him, and this is how he repays you?" I nodded, wiping my tears. "I know. That's why I'm done. I've canceled the trip, packed my things, and left the house." Olivia squeezed my hand, pride and protectiveness shining in her eyes. "Good. Now what's the next step?" I took a deep breath, the answer clear in my mind. "I'm filing for divorce." Filing for divorce wasn't just a decision, it was a declaration. I wasn't going to let Ethan or his parents take another piece of me. Olivia helped me every step of the way. We found a lawyer who had no ties to Ethan's family. I wanted a clean break, and I wanted it fast. I didn't need revenge or drama. I just wanted my life back. But life, of course, doesn't work that smoothly. A few days after I left the house, Ethan started texting me. "Claire, please. We need to talk. Can't we figure this out? I'm sorry. I miss you." I ignored every message, but each one made my heart ache. I wasn't numb to it. I felt every word. But I also knew that sorry wasn't enough to fix this. Then came the messages from his mother. "Claire, this is all just a misunderstanding. You're being unfair." And finally, "You ruined our family trip." The audacity of it hit me like a slap. Ruined their trip? They were halfway around the world on a vacation they stole from me, and somehow I was the villain. I turned my phone off, leaving their messages unanswered. One afternoon, the doorbell rang, and Olivia peeked out the window. "It's them," she said, her voice tight. I froze. "Ethan and his parents?" She nodded, her expression hardening. "I'll handle it." "No," I said, standing up. "I need to do this." I opened the door to find Helen and Martin standing on the porch. Ethan lingered behind them, hands shoved deep in his pockets. His eyes met mine, and for a second, I saw the man I fell in love with, the one who used to make me feel like I was his whole world. But that man was gone. Helen wasted no time. "You've got some nerve, Claire," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how difficult it was for us to fix the mess you made, canceling our hotel, leaving us stranded?" "Stranded?" I interrupted, my voice cold. "In a 5-star hotel in Venice. That's hardly stranded." Martin stepped forward, trying to play the peacemaker. "Let's all calm down. We're family after all." "No," I said firmly. "We're not anymore." Ethan finally spoke. "Claire, can we talk? Just the two of us?" I crossed my arms, staring him down. "You want to talk now? After you emptied my account and took your parents on the trip we were supposed to take together?" His face twisted in shame. I wasn't thinking clearly. I thought we could all go together and it would be fine. "Fine?" My voice cracked. "Ethan, do you even hear yourself? You didn't ask me. You didn't even tell me. You just took what was mine." Helen stepped in again, her voice sharp. "He's your husband, Claire. What's his is yours, and what's yours is his." I shook my head, feeling years of pent-up frustration bubbling to the surface. "No, what's mine is mine, and what's his is his. That's how trust works." But he broke that trust. Ethan took a step closer. "I know I messed up. I've been beating myself up over it. Please, let's fix this." I held his gaze, my heart aching. "You didn't just mess up, Ethan. You made a choice, and that choice told me exactly where I stand in your life, behind them." "No, that's not true," he protested. "I love you." "Maybe you do," I said quietly. "But love isn't enough. Respect matters. Trust matters. And you threw both of those out the window." The silence hung heavy between us. Finally, Helen spoke, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're overreacting, Claire. Families make sacrifices." "I've made plenty," I shot back. "I've bent over backward to keep the peace. I've given and given and given. But this was the last straw." Martin's expression softened. "We never meant to hurt you." "Well, you did," I said. "And now I'm done." Ethan's shoulders slumped. "So that's it? You're just walking away?" "I'm not walking away from our marriage, Ethan. You did that the moment you put your parents' wants ahead of our plans. The moment you decided their happiness mattered more than mine." Helen opened her mouth to argue, but Olivia stepped in, her voice fierce. "That's enough. You've said your piece. Now it's time for you to leave." They stared at her, stunned by her boldness. But Olivia stood firm, her arms crossed, radiating protectiveness. "Go," she said firmly, "or I'll call the police." Helen huffed, muttering something under her breath as she turned on her heel. Martin followed, casting one last apologetic glance my way. Ethan lingered. "Please, Claire," he said one more time. "Can we fix this?" I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "You can't fix what you broke, Ethan." "I'm done." With that, I shut the door. Later that night, as Olivia and I sat on her couch, she handed me a glass of wine. "You okay?" she asked gently. I took a sip, nodding slowly. "Yeah, I think I am." "You were strong today," she said. "I'm proud of you." I smiled, feeling a flicker of peace for the first time in weeks. "Thanks, Liv. I needed to hear that." We sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the day slowly lifting. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Divorce, rebuilding my life. It was all going to take time. But for the first time, I felt ready to face it. I was done being second to anyone. The day I filed for divorce, I expected to feel broken. Instead, I felt free. The courthouse was quiet that morning, almost peaceful. The papers were crisp and clinical, full of legal jargon that reduced my marriage to a list of assets and signatures. I thought it would hurt more to see it all laid out like that, to see something that once meant everything reduced to a business transaction. But it didn't. Every signature I added to the stack felt like cutting a tether. The weight that had been pressing down on me for months was lifting, bit by bit. When I stepped outside, the sun was shining. A gentle breeze played with the loose strands of my hair, and for the first time in a long while, I breathed in deeply, without feeling the weight of my past pressing on my chest. Olivia was waiting for me by the curb. The moment she saw me, she pulled me into a hug. "You did it," she whispered. "I did," I said, my voice steady. She pulled back and looked at me, a smile spreading across her face. "How do you feel?" I thought for a moment. "Lighter, stronger. Ready?" She nodded, pride shining in her eyes. "Good." Ethan's messages kept coming for a while. They shifted from apologies to pleas, and finally to anger. "I gave you everything," one text read. "You're selfish. You're tearing this family apart." But I didn't respond. I didn't even open them. Letting his words sit there, unread and unanswered, felt like taking back a piece of myself. Helen tried too. Her messages were a mix of confusion and entitlement. "We're family. You don't just walk away from family. You'll regret this, Claire." But I didn't regret it. Not one bit. I turned my phone off more often than not, choosing instead to focus on rebuilding my life. The apartment I rented was small, but it was mine. Sunlight flooded the living room in the mornings, and I filled the space with plants, books, and little pieces of myself that I'd forgotten about in my marriage. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in months. My easel sat by the window, the canvas slowly filling with soft colors that mirrored my emotions, hues of peace, hope, and quiet strength. One evening, I sat on my tiny balcony, a cup of tea warming my hands as I watched the sunset. My phone vibrated on the table beside me. Another message from Ethan. I stared at it for a long time before picking up the phone. "Patricia, we need to talk. Please." I sighed, scrolling through the long list of messages I hadn't read. Then, with a deep breath, I pressed delete. His number, his messages, all gone. It was a small action, but it felt monumental, a symbolic gesture that said, "I'm done carrying this with me." I was free. A few weeks later, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the strap of my new purse. It wasn't expensive or flashy, just something practical and stylish that I'd picked out for myself. A little reminder that I could treat myself without guilt. Olivia and I were heading out for dinner, a girls' night to celebrate my fresh start. "You ready?" she called from the hallway. "Coming?" I grabbed my keys, took one last glance at my reflection, and smiled. The woman staring back at me looked different, stronger, lighter, like someone who'd been through hell and come out the other side, ready to take on whatever life had in store. As we walked down the street, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I wasn't replaying arguments or wondering what I could have done differently. I was looking forward. The road ahead was mine, and I was more than ready to walk it. Months later, I got a postcard in the mail. The handwriting was familiar. Venice was beautiful. I wish we could have shared it together. No signature, but I knew it was from Ethan. I stared at the postcard for a long time, the picturesque canals and gondolas staring back at me. Then I tore it in half, tossed it in the trash, and walked away. Some dreams aren't meant to be shared, and some journeys, they're best taken alone. Story 2. I'm Elena, and I married Logan 3 years ago because I thought we had similar future goals. In the heart of the city, we moved into an opulent apartment at the top of a tall building. The view was captivating, and I treasured the time I spent each evening by the large windows, watching the sunset cast golden hues over the town. As the chief of the financial department of a media production firm, I had a prominent position. My business was taking off quickly, and I had to dedicate myself to making sure we had a bright future together. but my relentless attention to work started to interfere with our family life. Logan complained one evening as I walked into our house just after 10 o'clock at night. "Elena, you're hardly ever home. If you can enjoy this gorgeous residence, what's the point?" I put down my briefcase, exhausted. "Logan, we have discussed this previously. My career is really important. For us, not just for me. This lifestyle is supported by it." I quickly interrupted him before he could say anything about his mother's views. "I have no desire to play the part your mother has in mind for me." Logan's face became serious. "Perhaps you ought to give a damn." "She's family," I shot back. "I am too. When we were married, you were aware of my priorities. Family comes after career." As I lay awake that night, I could feel the distance between us widening due to his mother's influence, but I was determined to keep going. I was too far gone to turn back now. My supervisor, Mr. Arthur, called me into his office the next day with some encouraging news. Elena was joining forces with a large corporation from a different city. "Additionally, I want you to head the new division." The chance made my heart skip a beat. "It's fantastic, Mr. Arthur. Thank you for believing in me," he warned. "It will be a hard position. Can you make a complete, unwavering commitment?" I gave him my word. "Of course, sir. I am prepared to take on this task." I went to our favorite restaurant for a celebratory meal because I was excited to share the wonderful news about Logan. I waited for him while carefully setting the table with our finest china lighting candles, but he was clearly in a bad mood. "Why all this?" he asked, looking suspiciously around the setup. I let out a shout as my enthusiasm overflowed. "I'd like a big promotion. This can indicate a new home, international travel, many options." His tone was cold when he interrupted me, and more work hours. "When are we going to be prioritized?" I demanded that we come first. "This is for the future," he sneered. "Which future? You never show up. There's always a mess in this flat. I'm tired of ordering takeaway." Logan backed up to his office and closed the door without saying anything else. I sat by myself while the dinner in front of me calmed the turmoil that overpowered the apartment's luxury. 3 weeks after a housekeeper was hired, I saw that our house was spotless, which was a fantastic move. This minor change appeared to be a pointless sacrifice for my professional growth and, ideally, a start toward repairing our tense relationship. We had begun to reap the rewards of having a housekeeper prepare delectable dinners every night. However, this appeared to alleviate Logan's mounting dissatisfaction. As we came down to supper one evening, he joked coldly, "Find a way to replace yourself at home, too." I tried to lighten the mood by speaking in a light tone. I reasoned that it would help us to maintain a clean apartment and make sure we had delicious meals when we got home. "But, Elena, isn't that not the issue?" Logan cut me off. He slammed his fork down, raising his voice. "What comes next? Locating a replacement for you in other areas of our lives." His remarks were like a punch to the body. I muttered, "That's uncalled for," as I was taken aback by his severity. "Not appropriate. Let's discuss inappropriate behavior." Logan got out of his chair and angrily scraped it back. "Returning home to an empty house every time is inappropriate." "It's not appropriate to have a woman who prioritizes her career over her family." I was left alone with my thoughts and a sorrowful heart as he suddenly left the room. Every connection became a minefield as the ensuing weeks were filled with icy silences and acerbic arguments in our family. I was so focused on my work because I wanted to get promoted that I hardly noticed how far apart we were becoming. I took advantage of a rare day off as a chance to make amends and break the pattern. I wrote a hopeful note to Logan, "Organizing a romantic supper with your favorite dessert for tonight." Despite reading it, he remained silent. I took his silence as permission to proceed with the preparations. I chose a nice wine and set candles on the dining table. I waited impatiently for him while wearing my finest attire. When Logan entered, my excitement gave way to disappointment. With his mother not by himself, with Addison in tow. Oh, Elena, how unexpected! With a tone brimming with fake honey, Addison cooed. "Did you anticipate any companies?" I made an effort to grin. "I wanted to buy Logan a nice supper as a surprise. I didn't know you would be coming. I'm hoping there's enough for 3 people." As she settled onto the two-person table, Addison spoke. Logan sat down without looking at me. My intentions for a romantic evening are ruined when I repress my annoyance and acquire an extra place. Using subtle jabs, Addison controlled the discussion at dinner. My buddy Sarah recently became a grandma, you know. Having little ones around is such a blessing, she said, giving me a stern look. I responded curtly, taking a big swallow of wine. That sounds fantastic. She went on. To raise children, of course, you must be present. A woman's duty to her family comes first. After all, my rage erupting, I hold my fork tighter. A woman's role is really whatever she wants it to be, Addison. She squinted. Really? What about your responsibilities as my granddaughter's wife and possible mother? I stood up suddenly, and my chair squealed back. I had had enough. Addison, I believe it's time for you to go. Elena. Logan began to try to step in, but I remained unwavering. Logan, no. I am no longer able to do this. I call this place home. Addison stood up straight, her face flushed with outrage. I never. Logan, though, are you going to let her talk like this to me? I poured myself another glass of wine after they left and fell back on the couch. Amid the decreasing candles and the unfinished food, I felt the fantasies of the evening dissolve around me in my exquisite clothing. I considered a troubling idea. Was this the beginning of our disintegration? The next morning, the home was deserted. Logan had gone to be with his mother in order to get his mind straightened out, according to a letter left on the kitchen counter. I crumpled the note and tossed it aside, my hands shaking. A tornado of grief and rage roiling inside me. Weeks passed while Logan was away, and when he returned, our separation had merely widened. We moved about one another as if we were four strangers, speaking very little to one another. We only needed time to get used to it, I told myself. But in my heart, I'm not the source of anxiety. Then, one evening, I came home to a shocking scene following a demanding day of meetings. There was a sweet, flowery smell in the air. I opened the door to find Addison in our living room, looking eerily comfortable in a bathrobe and slippers. What's happening? I insisted. My gaze flitted between Logan, who was sitting on the couch looking uncomfortable, and Addison. Addison had a stiff, unpersuasive grin. It's so good to have you here, Elena. All we were talking about was dinner plans. Plans for dinner. The pitch of my voice rose. And why do you dress as though you're from here? Logan took a deep breath before his next statement struck me like a ton of bricks. Mom will be residing with us for some time. I'm sick of living by myself all the time, and I was dumbfounded because you're not here very often. Without telling me, you invited your mother to move in with us. Perhaps we could have discussed it if you had ever been home. Logan snapped back. I turned to Addison, who watched our altercation with a smug expression. I call this place home. Moving in here is not an option. Addison's face became stern. You're at home. My son also lives here, and I'll be here if he wants me to be. I'll remain. Leave now, I remarked in a low, threatening voice. Logan moved ahead of me. If you don't like it, Elena, you can leave. I was shocked. Please pardon me. This is my apartment. I bought it before we were even married. Now it's our apartment, Logan declared. And I'm telling you, if you can't accept my mother being here, then you can get out. Stunned into silence, I stared at the man before me. This was not the Logan I married. He was a stranger. Echoing his mother's sentiments, Addison advanced towards me with a threatening look. You heard him, dear. If you don't like the new arrangement, there's the door. I automatically moved back, my hand going for my phone. If you touch me, I'm calling the cops. Addison's face transformed to astonishment. Then she theatrically grasped her chest, sliding back into the couch as tears flowed down her cheeks. Oh, how you've hardened her heart. That dreadful work to think she'd threaten her own family. Logan went to soothe his mother, shooting me a scathing gaze without further word. I turned and headed to the bedroom, shutting the door behind me. The next morning, as I lay awake, my phone rang. It was Mr. Arthur, my boss. He responded sharply. I need you on a plane today. The merger has reached a turning point. At 7 a.m., the call arrived early, from Mr. Arthur, telling me that my attendance was essential to managing our merger's finances. Naturally, Mr. Arthur. I'll be present. As I looked around the still quiet home, presuming Logan and Addison were asleep, I reassured him. Logan showed up in the doorway as I was packing a suitcase in a hurry. He had a cold look on his face. "Are you going somewhere?" he inquired. I straightened up, looking into his icy eyes. Indeed. Due to the merger, I must travel for work. We can chat when I return, which is shortly. All right. Addison's gaze followed me from the living room as I brought my bag to the door. She smiled smugly. At the door, I stopped and looked back at Logan. "I'm going now. Upon landing, I will send you an SMS." His answer was cold and blunt. "Don't bother returning." Even though his remarks were painful, I was able to keep my anguish to myself. The sound of the door shutting behind me echoed like a solemn gong as I left. It was a demanding work trip, a hectic schedule of talks, meetings, and late-night financial document reading. It provided a much-needed diversion from the chaos at home. I texted Logan every night to let him know I was all right, but he never responded. 9 days later, I came back, my pulse racing as the cab arrived at my building and got closer to my flat. There was a problem. The lock did not accept my key. I knocked, bewildered. Logan and Addison were casually dressed as like nothing was wrong when the door flew open. "Logan?" Confusion tinged my voice as I spoke. "Why am I forced to work?" Logan's chuckle lacked humor and was icy. "Since I replaced the locks, I thought I had entered a nightmare. Logan, this is crazy. This is not possible. I call this place home." He had a stony countenance. "No more. Elena, you have a decision to make. This very moment, now. Your job or your house and spouse." I was astounded by the change in him. This Logan was not the Logan I married. Rather, he was a stranger who had been poisoned by his mother. "You're not serious," I muttered, finding it difficult to believe what I was seeing. Logan produced a pile of documents. "You can return to work after completing the divorce paperwork and killing serious signees. As a good wife, you can return inside after tearing them up." I glanced at Logan and then Addison after looking at the papers. My future became very clear at that point. I would live a life of resentment, control, and giving up all I had fought so hard to achieve. Not a word. I signed all the dotted lines on the papers after taking them. I remarked as I returned them to him, "I obviously don't have a husband or a family anymore, therefore that's why I selected my work." Before they could react, their expressions showed amazement, even hilarious in their incredulity. I pivoted on my heel and left. As I stood in the elevator and watched the numbers drop, my luggage followed me. Something in me burst out laughing. I had divorced a man who no longer saw me as his equal after I was kicked out of my own house. 10 minutes later, I had nowhere to call home. I was sitting by myself in a motel room that night. My mind was racing, thinking back on the day's turbulent events. I got out of bed early the next morning and called my friend Lena, a lawyer I had known since our college days. "Elena, what's the matter? You never make such an early call." Over the phone, Lena's voice rang with worry. When I was done, I spent the next hour telling her about the whole experience. She remained silent for a moment before speaking in a calm, comforting voice. "Elena, did you purchase the flat prior to getting married?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "In that instance, it is often considered distinct property rather than marital property. In a divorce, it shouldn't be divided." I felt a wave of relief and renewed energy. With fresh energy, I pushed myself into my work, concentrating on a significant merger at my place of employment. I persisted despite the long hours, which frequently resulted in my dozing off on my office couch rather than going back to the hotel. Another lifelong friend, Maria, who works as a realtor, phoned me a few days later. She said in a worried tone, "Are you okay, Elena, honey? Logan's posts caught my attention recently. He's making some really offensive remarks about you." "What sort of things?" With a knot in my gut, I asked. After hesitating, Maria continued, "He's calling you a cold-hearted professional woman and is considering filing for alimony and attempting to get the apartments back in the divorce." I gave a sour laugh. Give him a chance. He is aware that the residence belongs to me. I hung up on Maria and sat down at my desk. My mind is racing. Logan was trying to make me look bad by making me the bad guy in our story. I couldn't allow him to be successful. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Arthur. When I told him what was going on, he answered in a positive manner. "Your personal life won't affect your job here, Elena," he remarked. "You are a valued worker. Keep your performance unaffected by this circumstance." I was appreciative of his assistance and thanked him. Given that the merger was almost finished, Mr. Arthur recommended that I take a little time off to deal with my personal problems. "Thank you, sir. Thank you for that." I responded that night when I saw a notification on my phone just before I left the office. From the flat we shared, Logan had launched a live broadcast. Obviously mine now. Against my better judgment, I saw him discussing substantial upgrades with a film crew. I contacted Maria with a cunning plan when an inspiration struck me out of nowhere. "Maria? Elena is here. How soon can an apartment be sold?" I inquired. The phone rang with her laughing. "Elena, for you? I'm a miracle worker. What is the strategy?" Maria gasped and laughed enthusiastically as I laid out my ideas. "Oh," she said, "this is going to be amazing. I already know a couple who have been looking for a house like this. They are really discreet. They demonstrated to me that the deal could be finalized in as little as 3 weeks." I leaned back in my chair after the conversation, a wry smile spreading over my face as I considered Logan's misplaced self-assurance. He believed he was in charge, but he was about to be taken by surprise. The following 3 weeks passed quickly as day after day of non-stop labor went by. By night, I completed the merger, took care of the paperwork, worked with Maria, and observed Logan's blustery posts on social media over his remodeling ideas. When the crucial day finally came, I put on my finest outfit and spent some time over my morning coffee to be ready for what was about to happen. It buzzed on my phone. Maria's message appeared. "That's finished. Documents signed. Transfer of funds. En route are new owners. I wish you luck." I felt a rush of satisfaction. I tried to concentrate on my work at the office, but my mind kept straying to the drama that was about to happen. I got an SMS from Elena about noon. "Logan's mother is present, along with the TV team. He seemed to be rather proud of himself. The next hour of the show is about to begin." I had trouble focusing since my eyes kept going to my phone. At last, Lena's SMS message arrived quickly. "This is unbelievable. The new owners have just moved in." Logan was taken aback. "The staff is going crazy. It's awesome." My coworkers gave me perplexed stares as I couldn't stop laughing. Excusing myself, I withdrew to the restroom, giving myself a minute of undiluted happiness. With shaking palms, I went back to my workstation and saw an email from Lena with a link to a video. I made the click. Logan was in the middle of what was formerly our flat when the video began. Only my now. Grandly was talking about his intentions with his mother smugly hovering in the background, when all of a sudden everyone's attention was diverted by a ruckus off camera. The camera shifted to show Maria carrying paperwork when a well-dressed pair entered. "I'm sorry." The man spoke in a kind but firm manner. "But you're in our flat, I think." Logan's expression changed from bewilderment to irritation. "Your flat. I call this place home." He blushed. Maria moved forward. She maintained her professional manner. "Actually, Mr. Anderson, my clients are now the legal owners of this flat. This morning, the deal was completed." Logan's astonishment as he took in the situation was recorded on tape, from bewilderment to incredulity, and then to rage. "Sale. Which sale?" "I had to give Elena permission to sell this flat." "Actually," Maria said with a constant smile. "Yes, she could. She also did. She bought the apartment before you were married, and it was in her name. She was quite entitled to sell it." Chaos swept through the scene. The TV team arguing over the usage of the tape, Logan screaming, and his mother crying loudly. Logan and his mother were seen being led out by security at the end of the video. The TV team, thinking they had discovered a great program, followed with great anticipation. My phone buzzed back to my desk with another message from Mr. Arthur, this time from my office. I was shocked to see him grinning as I walked into his office, expecting the worst. "Elena." He pointed to a chair and said, "Sit down." I've watched the film. Social media is flooded with it. Uncertain of what was about to happen, my face heated with humiliation. I apologize, sir, for the incident's unintentional notoriety, I remarked, embarrassed that my private life had become public knowledge. I was surprised when Mr. Arthur laughed back. Just now, Elena, you proved why you are the best person to head our new division. You've demonstrated that you can use your cunning and resourcefulness to your advantage in a challenging circumstance, exactly what this merger need. I smiled as he spoke those words. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your support. And now, he went on, his tone growing more solemn, you ought to take that week off, in my opinion. We spoke about it. When you return, we'll complete your promotion and get you started in your new position. Take care of your personal affairs and choose a new location. I devoted the next week to looking for a new place to call home, eager to use the money from the sale of the previous flat to start over somewhere without any memories of Logan or our broken marriage. In my search, I had a wide range of alternatives. On the outskirts of the city, close to the offices of our recently combined firm, I found the perfect modest cottage. It was lovely, with a lovely garden and a view of the mountains, a calm reprieve from the chaos of the past. I made an offer right away, and it was approved right away. Lena and Maria came over to help on the day I moved there. We filled the house with laughing and lively conversation as we unpacked boxes and placed furniture. As night fell, letting go of the tension from the previous several weeks. Gazing at the mountains while sipping a glass of wine in the garden, I experienced a deep sense of tranquility. Regaining my sense of groundedness was a relief. The next week, when I went back to work, eager to take on my new duties, I could feel the strange looks and hear the comments as I passed through the office. I refused to be rattled and held my head high. I was greeted by Mr. Arthur at my new workplace, which is located in a prominent area with a breathtaking view of the city. Are you prepared to begin? Grinning, he asked. Ready as a rock, sir, I replied, embracing my new job with a rush of exhilaration. I lost myself in the intricacies of the merger, relishing the difficulties that called for extended workdays and intense focus. Knowing that this was what I had fought so hard for and made so many sacrifices for, I cherished every second. My phone buzzed one evening when I was working late. It was a message from Logan begging for a reunion. After giving the message some thought, I erased it without responding. I had officially closed that chapter of my life. I was holding the pen now as I wrote a fresh narrative. Story 3. Ariana is my name. I've been married to Hudson for more than 17 years, and the real estate company where I work as an appraiser has provided us with a comfortable apartment. Hudson and I became investors when our son, Waylon, graduated from college and moved away. Our relationship had been very steady for several years, and Hudson continued to work a typical office job. But lately, Hudson's incessant criticism of my behavior increased in frequency and got increasingly difficult to put up with. Still, I held out hope that this was a passing phase. My 52nd birthday was approaching. In an attempt to strengthen our bond, we organized a party for our loved ones. We sent out invites and made reservations at a beautiful restaurant, laying the groundwork for the ideal evening. As our guests started to come on the day of the celebration, I gave them a warm greeting. But I had a persistent feeling that something was wrong, particularly considering how unusually late my parents were. I took a break from the celebrations to give my mom a call. You guys, where are you? The celebration began. Despite my efforts to appear composed, my voice was tinted with worry. My mother paused before saying, I'm so sorry, Ariana, darling. This morning, your father died. I was dumbfounded with surprise and incredulity. No, it isn't possible. I succeeded, but in order to keep my joy intact, my mother's sadness validated the sobering truth she had planned to convey to me the following day. Hudson saw my anguish and inquired right away what was happening as he drifted back to the celebration. I sobbed as I informed him about my dad. His answer was shocking. Ariana, that's awful, but we can't call off the celebration just yet. It wouldn't be fair to our visitors since everything has been paid for. I couldn't understand his lack of empathy and was astounded by his insensitivity. As I made my way to the door, I told everyone that I had to go to be with my mother and urged everyone to remain and celebrate. Hudson said that I was being overly emotional and that I could go see my mother the next day when he called after me. I ran out into the chilly night air, leaving him shocked, angry, and devastated by his response. My mother was holding one of my father's sweaters in the dark when I got to my childhood home. As we hugged, her eyes, red and puffy from sobbing, met mine. It was evident that we were grieving together. As we sat in the dark, quiet chamber, I became aware that my life had changed forever. Not just because my father had passed away, but also because I had witnessed my husband's actual character. On the day of the burial, a day that ought to have strengthened our bond, Wayland was at my side, lending his calm strength as we dealt with this terrible loss together, and I stood next to my mother, taking condolences. I recognized the strength of the ties that were really important. After the funeral service, I glanced around at the crowd. I saw that Hudson and his family were conspicuously missing. It felt like a glaring betrayal that they were gone. Later, when we got together again at my mom's house, Wayland came up to me, agitated and perplexed. "Where are Dad, Grandma, and Grandpa, Mom?" I only shook my head. I responded with a mixture of disappointment and rage. "I'm not sure, honey. They never showed up." It was obvious that Wayland was frustrated, and I couldn't really blame him. I contacted Hudson that night after the visitors had gone, and my mother had fallen into a tired slumber. I can't hide how frustrated I am. "Today, where were you?" I insisted. He used the excuse that something they ate at the birthday supper had made him and his parents ill. I was unable to conceal my doubts since the time was too opportune. "You three, you were unable to attend my father's funeral. Do you see how that appears? How does that feel?" His apologies seemed flimsy, so I hung up, too irate to carry on the conversation. Within the next weeks, my mother fell into a severe despair as her health declined. As Hudson became more aloof and agitated by the situation, I balanced work and taking care of her. He suggested, quite coldly one evening, that we think about putting her in a nursing facility. I was horrified. She is running out of time, so I insisted on spending time with her. After much discussion, I suggested a solution that would change our lives, taking care of Grandma by moving into her bigger, more comfortable home. Hudson objected to the proposal, appalled. He refused to consider her anything more than a nuisance, saying, "I'm not required to care for a sick stranger." Days passed during the debates, and Hudson remained unmoved by my entreaties. He only reluctantly consented after I explained the financial advantages of moving without having to pay for rent or groceries. The day of the move was emotional. The house where my mother lived was large and tastefully remodeled, quite different from our last flat. Hudson remarked on the property's beauty and the effort my father had put into it, as if he was impressed. At first, I suppressed my more shrewd ideas, but Hudson boasted about our new living situation, and his co-workers acknowledged the true cause for our relocation. But as time went on, his discontent became apparent. He stormed into the kitchen one evening when I was cooking and complained about the stench of sickness. The final straw for me was his stern remarks. The knife I was holding was smashed down. Finally, I ran out of patience. As I chopped veggies and made supper, the room was filled with the stench of sickness, a continual reminder of my mother's state. Hudson became more and more uninterested every day. Every time he passed her door, he grumbled and stayed out of her chamber. Seeing my mother endure not just her illness, but also Hudson's obvious disdain was devastating. My mother found the courage to speak one peaceful evening as Hudson and I sat at the dinner table in tense silence. "Hudson, Ariana." Her voice was weak, yet forceful as she started. "I want to express my gratitude to you both for looking after me. I am aware that it hasn't been simple." Hudson hardly gave her a nod. He stared at his plate. "I would like to express my gratitude," Mom went on, and Hudson looked up at last, slightly intrigued. "Hudson, I want to give you the property on which this house is situated, Ariana too, and you will own the house itself." I was taken aback. I objected. "Mom, you don't have to do this." However, Hudson was clearly intrigued. My mother insisted on carrying out her plans, saying that Waylon would receive any money left over. Unable to contain his excitement, Hudson jumped up and went to get a bottle of wine. "Let's rejoice." Under his breath, he poured himself a glass and exclaimed, "Perhaps the old gal will kick it sooner rather than later," he muttered. His harsh remarks appalled me. "You dare?" My chair smashed behind me as I sprang to my feet, hissing, "You ruthless creatures!" With a sneer, Hudson shot back, suggesting that my mother was already pretty much dead and that at least we would gain something from it. The argument that followed was fierce. Hudson brutally insulted me, and I retaliated with just as much venom. Days turned into weeks, and he stormed out, letting go of years of suppressed disappointment and frustration, promising to stay with his parents. Hudson stayed away, and I had to accept an urgent work trip because it was essential to my job. The thought of leaving my mother alone was more intimidating now than it had ever been because I was her only carer. I spoke to her about my predicament with my usual altruism. She recommended a short-term hospice stay. She assured me that it would only be while you were away. "Those places are pleasant, and I'll be nicely taken care of." Tears clouded my eyes as I consented, heartbroken, although knowing it was the best decision. We organized her hospice care, and I prepared for my journey. Feeling a combination of relief and grief, I didn't notify Hudson about the hospice or my vacation plans. He was still with his parents, reportedly to teach me a lesson. The irony of his absence during this time of actual need was not lost on me. The night before I went, I sent Hudson a short text. "Going on a business trip. Please take after the house." I thought he may reflect on his conduct. But more than anything, I wanted him to at least preserve the practical parts of our shared existence in my absence. I didn't anticipate a reaction from Hudson, and none came 5 days into my work trip. My phone rang suddenly. It was Hudson. He greeted me with a tone that was dripping with perverse joy. "Hi there, Ariana. You know what? Have I done? I've destroyed your priceless home." It was amazing to watch the ceiling collapse and the walls fall. A shiver went through me. "What did you do? Why would you do such a thing?" I was able to say. His response was unsettling. "Because you will now need to depend on me to construct a new one on my property." "Yes, exactly. My territory. Remember how your mother handed it to me? Ariana, you'll have to rely on me, as a decent wife ought to be." I let out a wild chuckle that reverberated throughout the deserted hotel room as the seriousness of his actions dawned on me. My response seemed to unnerve Hudson. "What's making you laugh? Ariana, this isn't funny." When I composed myself again, I spoke in a cool, collected tone. "Hudson, you idiot. At the last minute, Mom changed her mind. You were not trusted by her, particularly after witnessing your treatment of her. So she changed it. You own the house. Or rather, it belonged to you. However, the land belongs to me." Before Hudson's little, incredulous voice could be heard over the startled stillness on the other end of the call. "You're telling lies." "I'm not," I said as Hudson and I experienced a sense of relief. "I'd like a divorce." As the truth of his treachery and the necessity of a divorce sunk me, I hung up, my hands shaking. Then, with terrifying clarity, it hit me. Mom's transfer to hospice care was unknown to Hudson. With her possibly inside, he had been prepared to destroy the house. "I filed for divorce right away after I got back," Hudson reflected angrily, claiming the land on the basis of my mother's original verbal agreement. However, I was ready. I had the revised documentation that reflected her last-minute adjustments. Despite the intense court struggle, justice was served, and I now own the farm, leaving Hudson with nothing except the remnants of his destructive behavior. Waylon was my staunchest ally during this journey. He reacted with shock and disgust at hearing about his father's behavior. "What did he do? It's unbelievable." Waylon said, "I'm done with him." After the divorce was finalized and I had complete possession of the farm, I decided to sell it, cutting off my relationship with his father. I was able to buy a little flat with the money. In the meantime, my mother's condition was becoming worse. I loved every minute of my regular visits to her in the hospice. With me by her side, she died quietly. It was a comfort that Hudson and his family were not there at her little private burial a few months later. As I went through her possessions in the weeks after her death, I had a feeling something wasn't right. I didn't come across postings for things I was familiar with until one evening while perusing eBay. Mom's old vase, her favorite armchair. On their 27th anniversary, her father even gave her pearls. I became enraged upon realizing that Hudson was responsible for this. I drove to Hudson's parents' house the following morning, feeling a mixture of rage and determination. I clenched my fists over the driving wheel until my knuckles were white. I was prepared to face him and take back what was rightly mine. It was my ex-father-in-law who answered the door when I knocked on Hudson's parents' house. I was surprised to see how pale and helpless he looked. "Are you all right?" I inquired on the spur of the moment. His appearance was gone, and he snapped back, his face contorted in wrath. "In contrast to your parents, I am in excellent health." His stern remarks hurt, and I answered more reflexively than with sincere regret. "I apologize." As I went on, my true mission became clear. "Online, I've seen my mother's stuff for sale. I'd like them back." At the entrance, Hudson's mom joined us. She had a fake look of worry on her face. "Dear Ariana, oh, those goods are now ours. After all, when your mother died, the home belonged to Hudson." My annoyance grew. "It doesn't operate that way. You are aware of it. I want those treasures back immediately since they belong to my family." When they declined, a loud and acrimonious debate ensued. They finally closed the door in my face. However, I was by no means defeated. It made a decision. I immediately went to the police station and reported the incident. Hudson's parents grudgingly went back after being threatened with legal action. The possessions of my mother, everything, the furnishings, the jewels. I was starting to recover from the hurts of betrayal 7 months after my divorce was finalized, and the struggle with Hudson's family life had gradually begun to find a new rhythm. Then, out of the blue, I got news that broke our tenuous calm. When cancer was discovered, it was already in its severe, incurable stages, and my ex-father-in-law had died from it. I was sympathetic despite our tense relationship. Nobody should have to endure that kind of pain. However, I was soon put to the test when I was called to the notary's office to have his mother, Will Hudson, read. I was called, along with Waylon. There was tension in the air. While his mother couldn't conceal her contempt, Hudson avoided eye contact with me and treated me like a stranger. "You have no right to display your face here. You are an unappreciative gold digger." As I sat down, she snarled. I remained calm, and Waylon silently supported me by holding out his hand. Everyone was caught off guard by the contents of the will as the notary started reading it. When my ex-father-in-law abandoned his home to Waylon and left Hudson and his mother the property and money, Hudson and his mother became enraged. "This is ridiculous," said Hudson. "Since we were his biological family, everything ought to have come to us." "The will is legally binding," the notary said calmly as he adjusted his spectacles. "Mr. Matthew made these choices while he was in good mental health. This cannot be challenged in court." As we walked out of the office, I saw that Waylon was unusually silent and lost in meditation. Knowing that he would speak when he was ready, I gave him some space. My phone rang 3 weeks after I had been enjoying some quiet time in my flat. It was my ex-maternal relative. She spoke in a panic. "Ariana, you must arrive immediately. Your son, he's lost his mind. In order to demolish the house, he has rented construction equipment." When I hurried to the site, I discovered mayhem. Waylon stood firm as heavy machinery loomed above the home. In a panic, Hudson and his mother begged the construction workers to stop Waylon from coming toward me. His face was composed but determined. "I understand that this may seem drastic, Mom." He started getting ready to defend his extreme choice. Waylon gave me a hard, piercing look of resolve. He clarified that it's retaliation for what they did to you, to us, and to Grandma's house. I nodded, comprehending the whirlpool of hurt and rage that drove his choice. "I'm not here to stop you, darling. I know." The sound of the devastation filled the air as he nodded to the foreman. As the home collapsed, the noises of slamming walls and shattered glass drowned out Hudson and his mother's cries. My feelings were raging. A part of me lamented the passing of the past. The house used to be filled with love and laughter. However, I also had a cathartic release and a feeling of justice being done. A few weeks later, I was enjoying a quiet evening when I heard someone knock. I opened the door and saw his mother and Hudson. They looked old and tattered. "Ariana." Hudson's voice started off with a hint of bitterness mixed with desperation. "We must speak. We have nowhere to go. We hoped we could spend some time with you." I couldn't speak. "Remain with me. You've always been so considerate and accountable in spite of everything," his mom added, her eyes beseeching. I was shocked by their request's boldness. These were the individuals who had mistreated my mother in her last days and caused her a great deal of suffering. "I'm looking for my charity now." "No," I answered definitively. "Not at all." Their expressions dimmed, but I persisted, my tone steady as years of repressed anger and pain were examined. "Do you still remember how you handled my mom? How, out of anger for me, you called her a burden and were prepared to demolish her home when she may have been inside?" They seemed embarrassed. However, underlying that, I could feel their brewing rage. Reluctantly, Hudson acknowledged that we had made mistakes. "What are we meant to do?" he continued, and I braced myself by inhaling deeply. "That is no longer an issue for me. You have to live with the repercussions of the decisions you made, like I had to." Muttering to themselves, they walked away. I banned their numbers right away after they left. Through mutual friends, I didn't want them to bother me anymore. Later, I found out that Hudson had used the proceeds from the sale of the site, where the destroyed home formerly stood, to buy a modest apartment in a dilapidated area of the city. Waylon snorted when I brought this up to him at one of our dinners. They should be there. He sounded great in a dilapidated abode surrounded by deterioration. "Isn't it appropriate?" I nodded, experiencing a wide range of complicated feelings. A glimmer of sympathy was felt for Hudson and his mother, who had now been brought to this level. However, a bigger part of me recalled all the damage they had done. The previous several months have changed me because of the harsh words and brutal deeds. I had just gotten a sizable quarterly bonus, and my career at the real estate business was flourishing. It was satisfying to be acknowledged for my efforts, particularly following such a turbulent time. I connected with my mother when I ran my palm over the polished surface of her refurbished antique writing desk. The wood's familiar texture brought back memories of her sitting there, handling her money and penning letters. As I rebuilt my life, it seemed as though a piece of her was still there, guiding me. My thoughts were interrupted by my phone ringing. Waylon was the one. As I answered the phone, I could hear his excited voice vibrating. Excitement filled Waylon's voice. "I've got news, Mom," he said excitedly. "Honey, what is it?" I had an idea of what he may say, so I asked. Melody said yes when I asked her to marry me. My heart was bursting with happiness. Melody was a brilliant, caring young woman who really brought out the best in Waylon. "That's fantastic news, my love. I'm very pleased for you too." After discussing their future plans for a time, Waylon's tone changed to one that was more somber. "I want to discuss something else with you regarding the wedding, Mom. I've made the decision not to invite Grandma or Dad, following all of their actions. On the happiest day of my life, I do not want them present." I inhaled deeply, comprehending his choice. "It's totally up to you, Waylon. The day of your wedding ought to be a joyous celebration of love. Be in the company of people who genuinely care about Melody and you. I fully support you if that's what you feel is correct." I kept thinking about Hudson and his mother after we hung up. Although I didn't actively look for information on them, I did occasionally receive glimpses into their lives. Hudson was working 2 jobs to make ends meet, according to the most recent update. His mother and I were still living in that dilapidated apartment, and despite their best efforts to control and break me, they were suffering in the disaster they had created. On the other hand, I was stronger and more resilient after the experience. From the freshly rebuilt side table, I grabbed a framed picture of my parents and stared at it. "Mom and Dad, I wish you could see this," I muttered. "You would be proud, I believe. Their recollections and the principles they taught me have remained a source of guidance and support for my determination to lead an honest and loving life." A far cry from the remorse and anger that appeared to permeate Hudson and his mother's days. I sensed my parents' silent approbation as I made my way through this new phase of my life, and their legacy served as a lighthouse for me.